we are here to debate an important motion. This House believes that free speech at universities is more important than political correctness. You, attending here, will be asked to either carry the motion and pass it or defeat it. And here to argue the motion, we have a very illustrious group. Supporting the motion will be Arturo Kundo, right here, and Angela Riedish. And speaking against the motion and arguing against the motion will be right here, Gloria Blackwell and Musharraf Zaidi. The conversation we want to have, the debate we want to have, is crucial at this time. The role of the university as a place for free exchange of ideas carries with it the responsibility to feel safe and free from harassment. Long considered a beacon for free expression, universities today are becoming a battleground for these two ideas: freedom of speech, political correctness. In some countries, freedom of speech is promised, but there's intimidation. In other countries, there's political correctness guaranteed, but it will depend on the culture of how we understand political correctness. So, the way we're going to be doing this debate is as follows. We have just under 60 minutes now. Each side will argue their point in a parliamentary style. You first will have the responsibility to vote with the clickers that are on your benches to either vote in support of the motion or against it. At the end of this debate, you will be asked to vote a second time. We will see if our debaters succeed in swaying you for the motion or against it. As you know, the entire forum is on the record, so you are welcome to engage not only in your questions and comments at the right time, but also if you use Twitter, then use the hashtag GESF, which is the name of our forum here. We encourage you to join through live tweeting if possible. And that is the main point. We hope to keep order. I will enjoy using this when the time is right. So first, I would like to ask the first House Speaker speaking for the motion, Arturo, to come up once we vote. So if we could please vote first, bring your clickers, and the motion I will repeat in order for you to either go with the motion or against. This House believes free speech at universities is more important than political correctness. If you are for, then use the A button. If you are against, B button. And if you are undecided, C. So please vote. 10 seconds to vote. Okay, so 67% of you are for the motion, 14% are against, and 19% are undecided. So 67% for, 14% against, and 19% undecided. Arturo, you have 7 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thanks. Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I want to tell you that 67% of you is right. Indeed, I think freedom of speech is, if we have to choose, more crucial, if you will, or more urgent than political correctness. But let me explain a little bit more also to the 19% of you who are undecided on which side to take. So first of all, universities are supposed to be places where ideas can be freely discussed. That's at the basis of what we do. Not only ideas in a static way, but in a dynamic way. That's how knowledge progresses, is by contrasting ideas and positions. Furthermore, I mean, if a university were to object or to prevent a particular idea or a particular set of ideas from being presented, then it would stop being a university. It would be more like a political party or a church when you define, what is right and what is not right. Instead, what universities are based upon is on the process, on the scientific process, on argumentation, on how do you debate those ideas is important. And with that also, let me say that said, universities should not be political platforms, if you will. So a political debate, for instance, not the only type of debate, but a political debate at a university wouldn't be or shouldn't be the same as, let's say, on a network, on a TV network. Because the basis of our debate at universities is arguments, ideas. And we should counter those ideas. Every idea has to be freely presented, but also have to be able to be freely countered and objected to through arguments, through tearing or teasing apart its components, its facts, its evidence, or the evidence they are supposed to be based on. And that said, I think it's hard to argue today, against the evident need, urgent need for more debate, more argumented debate over ideas. And this is all around the world, advanced economies, developing countries, all over the place. We find people who are falling into trenches. And of course, technology is furthering that, because now we're exposed to ideas that are very close to our own through a lot of different technologies, set of technologies that help us navigate through the immense amount of data and arguments and ideas and false arguments and false ideas and also alternative facts these days. And the problem with that is that we get into these trenches that technology just digs deeper for each one of us. And so universities, I think, must remain till the end, and I hope it's not the only place or the only type of institution where these ideas can be presented and countered. Of course, we're talking about freedom of speech over political correctness. And here we have to be relative in the sense that these two, actually the two terms, but political correctness more so, have a very American context. In the US, there's on the freedom of speech, but also on the political correctness, a particular meaning to them. What I refer to political correctness, I mean especially when there is some social convention that prevents us from discuss certain issues. It's not the same as saying, because lately being politically incorrect has meant in some places insulting others, or hate speech has been interpreted as not being politically correct. And that's not the same to me. That's harassment, or that's insult, and that's offense. And of course, respect has to be the basis of that freedom of speech, that freedom of contrasting ideas, or else we wouldn't have those. What we have, even if the university doesn't censor other ideas, then the social, space will censor. Of course, universities operate within a context, and many times university leaders cannot control that context. By that I mean, when a debate happens, people presenting different ideas might be harassed, not by people within the university context, but outside. And that's the reality of today's world. I mean, this forum is on the record, and many things are on the record these days. It's really hard to find an off-the-record setting, even when we're taking, what we think are private photos or having private conversations. So that's a challenge, for sure. Another challenge is that we need our students at universities, members of our universities, organizations, they need to learn how to engage in this. They cannot be just throwing ideas and insulting each other. That might be okay in political debate outside of an university, campus or a university setting. But that's the type of debate that I think we need. How am I doing?
You've got 2 minutes.
Thank you. Now, we also need to be clear about one thing, and this is not only in the US, but in general. Today, many opposing ideas are just hateful or expressions of hate, or expressions of racism, or expressions of a number of things that are wrong. But they need to be exposed wrong. And the only way that they can be exposed wrong is that if they are exposed, if they are allowed a space within, as I said, within rules. So we need to counter them, as I said at the very beginning, with arguments. That's what universities are for, I think, and what we should be teaching our students. Because being very honest, our students, university students in the world, are still a minority. They are an elite, hopefully not a social elite, although they correlate, unfortunately. But they are called to be leaders, in my opinion. And if we're not teaching the leaders of tomorrow to, counter their opposing ideas through argument and debate, then what we'll see is more of the violent and, conflicting world that we see today. Thank you.
Thank you. Our first opposition speaker speaking against the motion is Gloria Blackwell.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Good afternoon, everyone. During the past several years, many American campuses experienced and continue to experience unrest, and we all know that activism is an important part of our democracy and our campuses. The Black Lives Matter movement resonated and inspired students to join the protest against the persistence of racial discrimination in American society and to demand that their colleges and universities adopt policies that promote equality. Campus buildings named after defenders of slavery, racist college mascots, and the provenance of university funding have all come under scrutiny. Campuses are being required to be more thoughtful about the inclusion of people who have been historically excluded from institutions of higher learning. It's clear to me that free speech is very much in place and vigorous on college campuses. But at what cost? Individuals can, of course, say whatever they want, no matter how offensive it is. But as campuses have become more diverse and inclusive, students and faculty are learning that there may indeed be consequences involved with sharing their viewpoints and opinions. Why should it be acceptable to use language that is racist, homophobic, sexist, misogynist, or prejudiced without any education about its damage and harm? Free speech is interpreted as giving people a license to be exactly those things, or to intimidate or harass others when not used with discretion. If you express it, society is right to shut it down. Freedom of speech gives us all the right to speak our minds. But does it outweigh the right to correct and attempt to inform those who use speech that could be construed or is blatantly offensive? I don't think so. On campus and in the real world, some students are more vulnerable to that so-called free speech. You can call it being politically correct, if you will. It should be elevated to greater importance. Merriam-Webster defines politically correct as agreeing with the idea that people should be careful not to use language or behave in a way that could offend a particular group or people. Although political correctness is commonly portrayed in a very negative light, it simply, at its most basic form, is simple human decency. And it informs us that all people, regardless of age, ability, race, gender, sexual orientation, or class, should be treated with dignity and respect. Free speech and political correctness exist along a spectrum of agreement and dissent on our campuses. And we know that there's certainly been enough attention given to free speech and political correctness on college campuses. Marginalized communities who defend themselves have been accused of doing so at the expense of free speech. But if the controversial or offensive words were not being spoken, we wouldn't be talking about free speech in the first place. Political correctness values speech that unites rather than divides us, with respect for our differences. A report released last fall by PEN America and Campus for All, Diversity, Inclusion, and Freedom of Speech at U.S. Universities presented a detailed analysis of free speech and political correctness issues, where they found that because of the sharp changes in the composition of demographics of college students, including the increasing numbers of Hispanics, African Americans, and Asians, and women since 1970, the dynamics and power of structures need to evolve to meet this new reality. While more than 70% of students tell pollsters that they support free speech and a diversity of opinions on campus, a majority also endorse regulations to ban remarks that are offensive to students who are members of a minority group because the struggle for equal rights on campus, as we all know, is hardly over. Because if students struggle to learn because they feel bullied or intimidated, or if ideological arguments overshadow the lesson at hand, it's more important to address these challenges of speech. The Penn report also includes an observation of another issue that has emerged: microaggressions. A quote from Jerry Kang, UCLA law professor and vice chancellor for equity, diversity, and inclusion, notes that the cumulative effect of these subtle dismissals was important to bring to the surface, because words, as he indicated, actually do matter. Quote, and anyone who suggests that words don't matter hasn't studied history, psychology, propaganda, the media, etc. Regardless of an author's intent, words do have and could have consequences in all kinds of ways, especially when they echo and repeat. They can create an environment that makes you feel different or out of place, and they can undermine an equal learning environment. If there's any real value to the microaggressions discussion, it's to point out that words can matter in ways that you might not realize, and you should just understand the consequences of your actions. Most college students embrace the idea of an open learning environment on campus that exposes them to all types of speech and viewpoints. But a large majority also believes that schools should be allowed to restrict slurs and other intentionally offensive language, according to a Knight Foundation and Museum Institute poll in partnership with Gallup. The survey also found that students draw a distinction between speech that is politically offensive and expressions that are slurs or promote racial or gender stereotypes. Asked whether colleges should be allowed to restrict political views that are offensive or upsetting to certain groups, 72% said no. 76% of white students and 59% of black students held this view. But overall, 69% said colleges should be able to limit the use of slurs and other language that is intentionally offensive to certain groups. 79% of black students and 67% of white students endorse this view.
Gloria, you have 20 seconds.
Thank you. It's not about people just needing to learn to be less sensitive or that they can't take a joke. Those in any majority, whether it be racial, ethnic, gender, or sexually based, are unaware of the systemic discrimination minorities and women face. Campus leaders should strive to foster a learning environment that is welcoming and productive for all students. Free speech at universities is not more important than political correctness. We need basic human decency to create a better world for us all and create true global citizens. Thank you.
You have heard arguments for and against. Now you will hear the second House Speaker for the motion. Please go ahead.
Thank you. And thank you all for coming to listen to this important debate. And I must say at the beginning, when a third of the folks here thought that they weren't sure, or they either disagreed or they weren't sure about the importance of free speech at a university, I was a bit taken aback. That said, to the extent that people define political correctness as a respectful environment that embraces kind of the collegial environment at the university, I can see where that might be somewhat confusing. And I think that a debate forces you to kind of one end or the other of a spectrum, and of course this is a spectrum. But when I think about these issues, I think about free speech. The biggest challenge for me around free speech is ensuring that the university enables discussion of all ideas. And since we're talking sort of free speech versus less free speech, what I'm talking about is the discussion of unpopular ideas. And I think that my colleague mentioned that this is particularly alive on North American campuses, and most recently, many of you may have seen discussions in the media about the events at Middlebury College, where a speaker came to speak, the person who wrote The Bell Curve, which was a discussion of the genetic basis for intellectual achievement. a speaker whose views many disagree with, including the person who invited him, and this individual was chased off campus. The inviter was physically assaulted, and so even you might think, oh, well, discussion of unpopular ideas, we don't have to worry about that. The answer is yes, we do have to worry about that. So why is it so important that we have free speech on campus, that we're allowed to talk about unpopular ideas? And I've sort of got three headings here. The first is that the discussion of unpopular ideas is important because if we only talk about kind of the known set of ideas to which, in many cases, faculty members have dedicated their lives and they're going to defend vehemently, we won't progress. We have to be willing to ask the difficult questions. We won't progress in terms of our environment, in terms of social, and in terms of economic activity. A second reason is that, and I would say again that maybe in North America or maybe in the West this is particularly salient, if we don't talk about unpopular ideas inside the university, they're going to be talked about outside the university. If I think of one kind of example, it would be the role of migration and migrants in the US. And if you just say, well, we're not going to talk about that, we're going to assume the liberal kind of left-leaning position on that, well, then it's going to happen, the discussion is going to happen outside the university with, I would say, dangerous consequences. The third thing, which was alluded to by Arturo, has to do with the skill set that our students need to learn. In an age where alternative facts can actually be a phrase that exists, the key, the key skill that our students have to learn is to use the judgment to say how do we know from the myriad things that are out there where sort of the facts lie. And if our students only hear one perspective, if they're not given multiple perspectives, many of which, for instance, I might disagree with vehemently, then they're not going to develop those skills that we need our citizens to hold. So I think for all of these reasons, as I say, respectful dialogue, yes, but an absolute openness to discussing unpopular ideas is essential. Some of the issues that, at least on my campus, come up that are challenging to talk about are the anti-vax debate. There are many people who think that you shouldn't vaccinate your children because it will cause some kind of an issue. Science rejects that position. To what extent would we encourage debate about that? Pro-life movements across at least many Canadian universities are often wanting to have demonstrations on campus, are invited by some of the student groups to speak on campus, and again, climate change deniers, another kind of group that often is wanting to bring people to campus. Do we encourage that? Do we allow that? And I guess when I think about free speech, I think, and we haven't kind of joined this particular issue, is there's what happens inside the classroom, there's the curriculum issues, and then there's what happens outside the classroom. And very often in practice, that means student groups inviting speakers, and to what extent are student groups to be permitted to bring speakers to campus that might, if it's a question of inciting violence, that's illegal. Okay? So hate speech is illegal in Canada, and inciting violence is illegal in Canada. So we have laws. That's not political correctness, that's legality.
You have 2 minutes.
Just to allude again to another kind of very specific thing that I was dealing with recently. In Canada, if an individual wants to be referred to by a gender-neutral pronoun, for instance, they have the right to do that. Some of my colleagues at University of Toronto had a heated debate about that. They subsequently received considerable hate mail, attacks on their life. So the ability to speak openly about controversial matters, it's, again, something that we shouldn't take for granted. So I guess I'll just wrap up by saying that I do believe in a respectful environment, in an environment where indeed all views can be expressed without fear of bullying and harassment. But if you ask me, is free speech an absolutely core element of a university life? I have to say yes.
Thank you. We now have our second opposition speaker speaking against the motion. And for those who have joined us, I will just remind us of the motion. This House believes free speech at universities is more important than political correctness. Musharraf, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and thank you to the Varkey Foundation, to Vikas Pota and the organizers, and especially everybody who's here today to partake in this conversation, which is a serious conversation. But you wouldn't know it from the presentation of those speaking for this, because they've tried to present the political correctness side of this discussion as some sort of ridiculous appeal to argue against freedom, which of course it's not. Who could argue against freedom? Freedom is innate to all of us. We you know, it's like oxygen. So nobody here is arguing against freedom. What we're arguing against is a free-for-all in which people can say whatever the hell they want about whoever the hell they want. And that really is the framing of the political correctness versus free expression debate. So the young minds in the audience, it's so great to see you guys here, and I hope you guys will vote reasonably and with sanity, and there's only one way to vote in that regard, and that is to make sure that you reject this appeal to provide a cover, an umbrella for hatred. Now, what we're arguing for, what Gloria and myself are arguing for is very simple. We're arguing for respect, we're arguing for inclusion, and we're arguing for equality. Now, this isn't particularly unreasonable, and yet you heard people here try and frame this in a very negative way. Now,
more respect for those for the motion for the House, but I will let you continue.
By the way,
continue.
And this is political correctness. What I'm practicing is political correctness, and you see how freely I'm speaking. I'm framing a fair debate in the fairest terms possible, and we have somebody, the honorable speaker. She's such a great person in person and in terms of her public persona as well. Now, we have to be very careful. I want to pick up some of the points that Arturo made and some of the points that Professor Angela Riedisch made. Arturo says universities are places where ideas are discussed. Now, some people would argue that Arturo is pining for an age long gone, because when young people are applying to university, they're not thinking about the environment of academic freedom that will be available there. These are the preserves of the intellectual ivory tower elites. Young people go to university to get degrees and get jobs, and they shouldn't have to confront racism and homophobia and anti-Semitism when they go there, especially young people who may have grown up in environments. Not everybody's from Canada. There's a lot of people from countries and environments where it's tough to be a certain color. It's tough to be from a certain religion. It's tough to be from a certain community. And universities are places where those people should be protected from the rule of the majority, the kind of majority that we saw at the beginning of this debate where people were voting for this so-called freedom. So I think universities have evolved. Arturo also said debates should be different between television and campuses. Again, there's kind of an age thing, and this is with due respect, you know, because Arturo and the professor are so much more experienced and they're wiser. Sometimes they've missed out on what's happened to the real world. There is no such thing as a university campus and the rest of the world. The internet and social media and television are ubiquitous. So what you find in the universities, what you find on Twitter at home, which is what you find in the mosque and what you find at church, you can find all of it on your Twitter timeline. So this fake division between universities being this very special place where we're able to say whatever we want about whatever community. No, that's not how the world works anymore, and we should not let people who are slightly old-fashioned determine what the future will look like. Now, Arturo also says we need to learn how to engage. And this is where I get really confused about the position that they've taken, because actually that's exactly what the point of political correctness is. We do need to learn how to engage. And the only way we can engage with people who are different from us, who come from a different place, who come from a different background, is by respect. We don't get to bring our biases either to university campuses or to this room or to our Twitter timelines. What we get to bring is a respect for the other party. So we can express our views, and we should have total freedom to be very clear about what our views are. But that clarity does not require us to be offensive. And what this freedom idea is really about in the face of political correctness is, hey, the political correctness people are trying to restrict your freedom. No, we're not. We're trying to make sure that we can have a reasonable and adult discussion between people that come from different backgrounds and different places. Professor Riedisch said, if it doesn't happen in university, then it will happen outside university. And you see a pattern between the speakers, right? It's, again, this whole thing about how the university is a different place and the rest of society. No, it's all the same, man. It's all on your Twitter timeline. Alternative facts were cited. Now, one of the tricky things that people do is they try and confuse you. So when somebody says alternative facts, you think Trump. You say, oh, I don't want Trump, so I better shut down the political correctness side. Except the people that voted Trump, one, not all of them are bad people. Two, Donald Trump himself cited political correctness as one of the things that he was going after. So if you stand on the side of real facts and against alternative facts, and if you stand on the side of goodness like Justin Trudeau and all that great stuff that's happening in Canada, then what do you want? You want political correctness, the single greatest specimen of political correctness, the man that's standing for civilization today is who? It's the politically correct dude from Canada, me and Justin Trudeau. Now,
Order.
okay. Now, there's a few. I mean, how much time do I have, Mina?
You have a minute and a half.
Fantastic. Look, I think the presentation that political correctness equals suppression of debate is ludicrous. Without political correctness, we don't have the ground rules and the basic framework on how to engage each other. The world's getting smaller. Social media, the Global Education and Skills Forum, and so many other places where so many different people from different places come together. And we bring all our baggages and all our biases with us. We're not supposed to throw those baggages and those biases in each other's face. That is not freedom. That is disrespect. The thing that prevents that disrespect from infecting the entire discourse is political correctness. It's basic decency. So I hope not only everybody else in the audience in this great house and the speaker, but also Arturo and Professor Riedish will reconsider their misguided and dangerous position. We actually need a wholesale embrace of political correctness if we're to move forward in this dangerous and complicated world. I'm going to close by citing something that, is not cited frequently enough. The greatest trick that the devil ever pulled was convincing you that he didn't exist. And the greatest trick that haters ever pulled was arguing against political correctness. I thank you very much.
Thank you. So now we open the floor to questions from you who attending here who will have to decide whether you will support the motion or defeat it. I repeat what the motion is. This House believes free speech at universities is more important than political correctness. Please raise your hand if you would like to pose a question. Okay, so we have several. So we have gentleman here and the lady here, and then we'll take more.
Matthew Goldie-Scott of Carfax Education. Those speaking against the motion, it seems to me we're speaking from a point that was self-contradictory. So when the first position was given, it was that a majority of students are in favor of limits on the freedom of speech if they feel that could be offensive. And then the latter speaker referenced the tyranny of the majority. And it seems that there's a binary position. Either you say people can say anything, or you accept there are some limitations. So it's either free speech or limited speech. Now, if those limits are going to be placed, it's not clear to me how the opposition suggests that it couldn't be used for despotic purposes or to be on the wrong side of history. If, for example, the civil rights movement in America had not been allowed to express a divergent viewpoint from the status quo, I think changes might not have occurred. Within universities in South Africa, where many undergraduates spoke out against the status quo to attack apartheid, people found that offensive. People found it difficult to hear. And it's by challenging views and by holding divergent opinions and by expressing them in open debate within the academy, and I would argue that within those ivory towers, those debates remain important, we allow for protection
Point
against
taken.
despotism.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Lady here with her question. So this is a question for those who are arguing against. We'll come back to you. Please.
So I think it's interesting to note that the most unpopular side at the beginning of the debate is the one arguing for political correctness. So my question is, why is it that unpopular or potentially diverse opinions cannot be expressed whilst also maintaining political correctness? That is to say, not marginalizing or insulting certain groups who are perfectly capable of presenting a diverse or potentially unpopular idea in a manner that does not offend, marginalize, or exclude certain minority groups.
Thank you. Further questions? Okay, yes, sure.
I'm Dr. Arkira. I've heard both sides. Better than political correctness will be the term. If any issue is being debated in an university campus, affecting the very national fabric of the country, that should be banned. I agree with him, the gentleman who was there.
Thank you.
Anything that, national fabric. I mean, one can discuss the issues, the social issues, as he said. And I mean, you can discuss. But please, in the garb of freedom of his speech, do not try to devastate the basic fabric of a country. Do not do that. That is my submission. That should be.
Thank you.
They should be.
We have two questions at the back here.
Thank you. My question actually goes to Madam Speaker because I think there's a lack of clarity for me what political correctness is. So if you can really explain to us or define what political correctness is, then I think it would help me more understand what the opposing side is debating for and, you know, what the individual debating for the motions are also debating for.
Yes, and I think he was also thinking about what I was thinking, because my question was, could we define university? I remember my professor challenged us and said university comes from the Latin word universus, which means whole or entire, which can also be named as a world of its own. And in the context of how do we create real global citizens, my question would be, at a university where ideas are supposed to be shaped to create these global citizens, how are we supposed to restrict speech if we are trying to create global citizens, because it's also a world of its own? And so I'm James Kasagana to teach for Uganda.
Thank you. It's good to have Teach for Uganda here, and I hope others from Teach for All are also engaging with us, because it doesn't necessarily just start at universities, but for the schools involved also that we'll have to think of it. Being the speaker, I'm going to close the floor now for questions because we need to have the responses to these questions. As for how we define political correctness, I am going to use my power to not answer the question and ask each of the sides to respond what they're arguing for or against when it comes to political correctness in order to be clear for the floor. As for me, it's about respect and not necessarily when political correctness is deemed to be a cover-up for actually expressing appeasement for others. So, but it depends on how also our two sides approach. So I would like for either Arturo or Angela to come up and respond to the question about allowing, you know, unpopular or diverse opinions to be expressed, but in a politically correct way. So how can you not put boundaries? And I believe that was the question from here. Please.
But also the question on what do we mean?
Yes.
In general, the point we were trying to make is when respect, of course, nobody can argue against either, just as Musharraf made the point that nobody can argue against freedom. It's when that respect translates into censorship. And it's complicated, but we'll talk about that later, but that's our definition. It's when it creates a limit. But respect should be, as I said, you know, sacred. On the how do you create that diverse? I think it has a lot to do with procedures and rules. And by that I mean, once we define what's valid and what is not, like today, we have in charge someone with the enlightenment of our Madam Speaker today, and I can attest to that as a long friend. Then you can trust the process to some extent. And so let ideas that might be diverse, but that, you know, Madam Speaker would use the gravel to stop something that would go out of line. So I think we need a process. It's not like open market, you know, crazy. It's not a box ring where anything goes or anything like that. Even box rings have rules, but so I think that's kind of the key. I think diverse contexts call for diverse, you know, more diverse contexts are more complicated, and we need to be more careful. But in a global world, we need to create those global contexts, and we need to engage.
Arguing against the motion, if you can respond to the question that asked about the contradictions and the tyranny of the majority, but also how limits can be done. So you can answer that, and also what do you mean by political correctness?
As I said at the top, and as Arturo quite rightly recognized, political correctness in the way that we've tried to define it and talk about it is about respect and dignity. And this is not respect and dignity because of the innate value of respect and dignity. This is about respect and dignity because of the innate value to the discourse of respect and dignity. Because universities are now places all over the world where a lot more people, you know, that we've had this great global growth story. And so a lot of, if we talk about the US or Canada, then you're talking about, you know, a lot more Tamil-speaking kids and a lot more Hindi-speaking kids and a lot more black kids and a lot more yellow kids, you know, a lot more color in your universities, a lot more chicks wearing hijabs, a lot more dudes with like their beards grown out and a turban on top of their heads. And there was a time when we used to refer to disabled people as retards, and we don't do that anymore because there may be disabled people in this room, or there may be people who have family where there are people who are disabled. You might have a sibling or a brother or a sister or a parent or a son or a daughter. And so it's about making sure that we keep everybody in the room. Political correctness is about making sure we keep everybody in the room. We can make the case that we want to make. You know, in India, there's been a lot of controversy around groups that are pro-Kashmir and not so much against Kashmir. And again, I don't think that a lot of Indians are against a free debate, but a lot of Indians are feeling really hard done by some of the groups that use more colorful and inflammatory language. Political correctness is about making the point that we make. So for example, I'm from Pakistan and I'm very much pro-Kashmiri freedom, but I've just said that without attacking my brother from India. So it's about having a conversation between Indians and Pakistanis, between blacks and whites, between men and women, between homophobes and people who are homosexual, a real conversation in which we are not offensive to the other group. It's not about protecting a minority or not protecting a majority. It's about making sure that we can continue the conversation. We can disagree till the end of time, but as long as we keep talking, there's some space there for us to overcome our differences. You can't do that without political correctness. That's the point that
Sharaf, you're running into your closing argument. So I'm going to ask you to hold here. Right. So now we're going to have closing arguments for and against, and then we will give you the opportunity to decide who wins this debate. So closing argument for the motion, if you could please come forward. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you. First of all, thanks a lot, Musharraf. I think you made my case, so thank you very, very much. We need to talk, and that's the point. So first of all, let me say that, and I already mentioned it, but at the basis of this, any discussion has to be respect, for sure. And in that, we don't only agree, we strongly support, actually, everything that was said. That said, the point is, when you have to choose, where do you lean? And the point is, if we don't, respect in debating is something you exercise. So that you don't compare people to the devil, for instance, or you make all these arguments that are more that attack the person instead of the argument. But that's practiced, as many things in life. And so if you have to lean, when you have to choose, that's the point. You have to lean towards, let's talk about it, and let's prepare. I think your question was super wise. Let's prepare, and we'll learn. The first time we might get it wrong. And we need to fix, and we need to apologize, and we need to work, and we need to go the second time. And we need to fix it, because I don't think there is, especially in the very global society we live in, I don't think we have everything figured out about how to do that well. And we need to figure that out like very, very quickly, I really hope. So actually, I agree fully, and that argument begs for more debate, for more engaging in that debate. Protecting the minority. Sometimes it's not even the minorities. I've seen minorities oppressing majorities sometimes, because it is a social scale, and you quoted something very interesting about how the diversity of campus having changed. We need the social structures to change, and that could be a painful process, like, you know, going through adolescence. It's complicated, but hopefully we'll come out of it stronger. I accept I'm old, and so that part I'm okay with. I tweet too, but I'll refer to something Sadhguru said this morning. He said, you know, we won't have inclusiveness unless we experience it. And I'm not as global as others. I can accept that. I was born in Ecuador. I live in Costa Rica. But I visited, at this point, almost 100 countries, and I have good friends from all over the world. And I was born Christian. Now I don't feel almost anything. But that took time, and that took the process of knowing a lot of people. And many times those encounters were somewhat, and so that's where tweet is not the same as face-to-face. That's why we travel all over the world to come to Dubai and face each other and talk to each other and share a meal. Because it's in that human interaction that we learn things that we cannot learn from Twitter. And I use tweet, but yes, I use Twitter, not as some other leaders. But so I'm sorry, but I don't think it's the same. I think we need to learn to do the thing, to learn those rules and to develop those rules by engaging in them. Finally, I think everything should be debated. I'm sorry to say, but I don't agree that even things that challenge our national even identities, because for that talking, civil rights in the 60s in the US couldn't have it been debated because it was even not in the Constitution, but intrinsic. So I think the arguments beg for more, not less, debate and engagement.
Thank you. Okay, so closing argument against the motion.
Thank you. Arturo, by acknowledging the importance and centrality of respect in any discourse, whether it's on a university campus or elsewhere, you've essentially voted for, not for, but against the motion and against yourself, and that's fine. I think one of the great things about free debate that is respectful, that takes into consideration political correctness, is the ability of people to change their mind without having to feel bad about it. So I'm delighted that Arturo and Professor Riedisch have both moved to this side, and I hope that everybody else will see the light in the way that they have.
As Speaker, I assure you that we still have two sides of the debate.
If we do, then I think it's important for us to acknowledge exactly where we stand. A couple of times people cited the civil rights movement, and I find this incredible because this is exactly the problem with this whole concept of absolutely borderless and boundless freedom on university campuses. We've heard from population that comprises well over 60–70% of a country's population, how their rights are being impinged. We've heard groups adopt and really steal the language of the civil rights movement in service of ideas that are actually about hatred rather than about togetherness. We've seen a world in which boundaries are being raised and in which divisions are being deepened. And the cover for all of this is this idea that there should be real freedom of expression, that people should be able to articulate hatred and anger and a disjointedness and a feeling of being separated from their fellow man as something that's part and parcel of a freedom of expression agenda. There's nothing wrong with us having a robust debate. There's nothing wrong with us fundamentally disagreeing on really important issues, including the issue, for example, Arturo gave the example of his own journey, and with all due respect, I've also had a journey, but, I was born Muslim, and I continue to be Muslim, and I'm so proud to be Muslim, but what makes me almost prouder than being Muslim myself is when I meet my Christian brothers and I see the depth of compassion and their devotion to Jesus. When I meet my Hindu brothers and I see what they do in service of their spiritual tradition. When I meet Sikh brothers and their whole lives, they don't take off, these are amazing things that religion makes us do. And the reason that I have the ability to appreciate this and to celebrate this is because I've decided that I'm going to live a life in which I will express myself freely, but I will always do it with a great, deep, abiding respect, not because necessarily I believe in what you believe in, but because I believe in what I believe in. And because I believe in what I believe in, I have to give the next person, the next audience, the next room, the same respect and dignity that I want everywhere I go. So once again, this is not a debate between respect versus freedom per se. This is a debate between freedom at all cost, respectfully or not, is a cover, is something that we don't really understand how you can have respect and not be politically correct. So the only position in this debate to take with respect is the one for respect, and that's the position of political correctness. Thank you very much.
Thank you. You have heard both sides argued with passion, with conviction. What's interesting is how much the sacred has been raised, and whether what is sacred to you is religious or national or personal, it remains what is sacred that we can discuss in a public sphere. And universities are the greatest place for the public sphere, and that's what really is at the heart of this motion. So I will urge you all now to take part in voting. And the motion is, this House believes free speech at universities is more important than political correctness. If you are for, it will be A. If you are against, B. Undecided, C. So please vote. You have 10 seconds, 15 seconds. Oh, we're being generous. Wow, what a change. So to remind those who forgot or those who came in late but I was kind enough to allow to enter, at the beginning of this debate, we had a vote and 67% were for the motion, only 14% were against, and 19% were undecided. So based on that, we have clear winners because against were able to sway more people. So congratulations to those who voted against the motion, but also congratulations to this side that held their ground. That concludes our debate. You're free to go.